Hello, everyone. My name is Huijuan Li, and welcome to our Zoom meeting tonight. It's our pleasure to welcome Ray from Committee of 100 to share a study, The Fabric of Chinese American from Foundations to Frontiers, Contribution to the American Society. Ray, welcome to this, and thank you for sharing this study outcome.
Thank you, Huijuan and the Wayland community for having me, and thank you for your generous introduction. So to start off, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Committee of 100, it is a nonprofit membership-based American leadership organization of prominent Chinese Americans in business, government, academia, healthcare, and the arts. For over 30 years, Committee of 100 has served as the prominent organization committed to the dual missions of promoting the full participation of Chinese Americans in American society and advancing constructive dialogue and relationships between the peoples of the United States and Greater China. I encourage all of you to follow us, tag us, and share your learnings from today's talk. Now let's begin our tonight's presentation. Next slide, please. And here are our social media channels where you can tag us and follow us. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Next slide. So for tonight's agenda, I will go over the study, research findings, key takeaways, and calls for actions. Next slide, please. The report can be accessed on our website. I highly encourage all of you to read it for more in-depth information and analyses. Next slides, please. The question on your mind perhaps is, why now? We released the report in early February last year at a time where geopolitical tension is rising on the international front, particularly between the US and China. On the domestic front, inflamed nationalism, anti-immigration sentiment, together with Black Lives Matter's movement calling for social justice and opposes systemic racism. Furthermore, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, our community has seen an increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. So it is pivotal for us to examine the Chinese American community's contribution to the US. As Winston Churchill once said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Since their first arrivals in the country, people of Chinese descent, alongside other immigrant groups, have played an important role in the building of the nation and the shaping of its economic, institutional, and social fabric. Hence, Committee of 100 commissioned the Economist Intelligence Unit produced this landmark study combining unique data development, analysis, and economic modeling and expert interviews to illuminate how the Chinese American story, very oftentimes untold, interwaves with and has in some way shaped of the modern US. Next slide, please. Now, let's first take a look at the demographics of our community. Today, approximately 5.3 million people in the US are of Chinese descent, and 75% are American citizens, henceforth referred to as Chinese Americans. Chinese Americans make up 1.2% of the US total population. While the majority of Chinese Americans aged older than 25 have a bachelor's degree or above, compared with a third of general Americans in the same age cohort, 20% of Chinese Americans age 5 and older still cannot speak proficient English, double the share among Americans in general. Although the community overall has an income level above the national average, roughly 1 in 10 households earn less than $15,000 per year, and 35% have incomes below the national median. This diversity is a result of the community's immigration and integration history, which has intertwined with legal and social evolutions in American history, as well as geopolitical shifts, which I will go into next. Next slides, please. The Chinese American community today is present across all states in the US, with members ranging from first-generation immigrants to fifth, sixth-generation descendants, and representing great social economic diversity with hotspots including California, New York, Hawaii, Texas, and Washington. As you can see from the left graph, over 1/5 of Chinese Americans identify themselves with at least one ethnic descent other than Chinese. Arriving in the American West during the gold rush, later, as an economic depression hit the West in the 1870s, anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiment and violence grew among white workers. Many Chinese Americans moved to the East, Midwest, and the South, where their presence was better tolerated. By the turn of the 20th century, Chinese Americans resided in every US state. Next slide, please. Mirroring their immigration experience, the domestic integration of Chinese communities has been neither smooth nor linear. Historically, the Chinese arrived in the US in several waves. Beginning in the mid-1800s, early generations of Chinese immigrants came primarily as workers in construction, mining, and agriculture, and in some cases became small business owners. This immigration flow was soon severely limited by discriminatory legislation, including the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned Chinese immigrants from obtaining citizenship through naturalization. For many decades, they faced limited access to job opportunities. This immigration restriction, alongside other factors, including a lack of Chinese women among the early immigrants and low rates of interracial marriages, resulted in a decline in the Chinese American population. As you can see from the graph on the right, between 1880 and 1940, prior to the repeal of the act in 1943, the number of people of Chinese descent in the US declined by over 1/4, and their percentage in the total population more than halved. Next slide, please. As a result of legal barriers and anti-Chinese sentiment, for decades, Chinese Americans were restricted to the margins of society. They clustered in Chinatown communities that best served their economic, social, and political needs. Facing limited employment opportunities, many started small businesses, often in the form of mom and pop storefronts. Those who were able to start small factories tended to specialize in less lucrative areas, such as ready-made clothing, undergarments, and slippers, to avoid competition with white manufacturers. 60 years after its installment, the Chinese Exclusion Act was revoked in 1943, primarily driven by the alliance formed between the US and China during World War II. The repeal, together with other immigration policies, especially the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, reopened the immigration pathway to Chinese wage workers, entrepreneurs, and professionals with various scientific and technical skill, while also leading to inflows of students seeking a world-class American education, many of whom stayed after graduation and later became US citizens. Over time, a combination of population growth, immigration, and assimilation has created a robust, heterogeneous Chinese American community, which spans a diversity of income, educational attainment, and language levels. Next slides, please. These studies look at Chinese American contribution across three themes. Chinese Americans have contributed extensively to the US economy. They have come to play a greater role in public and institutional life, and they are an influential force within US society and culture. I will highlight each domain during the rest of my presentation. Next slide. Chinese Americans today represent a mosaic of communities across a broad range of economic segments. As consumers, employees, business owners, and corporate leaders, they make significant economic contributions in terms of GDP generation, job creation, and capital market growth. They contributed over $300 billion to US GDP in 2019 through consumer spending, supporting 3 million jobs. Chinese American-owned business generated approximately $240 billion in revenue and supporting 1.3 million jobs. When we talk about entrepreneurship, what I found interesting from the report is that the history of Chinese American entrepreneurship can be traced back to the first Chinese immigrants who arrived in the American West during the gold rush. The lack of established business infrastructure in the region created a gap in the market to meet the demand of a massive influx of fortune seekers from inside and outside the US. Sensing an opportunity, Chinese immigrants started businesses to provide essential services such as laundry. These entrepreneurial immigrants formed small businesses to serve Chinese consumers and later to provide much needed services in everything from laundry to food and accommodation. It is important to highlight that these contributions have been made despite legal and social obstacles. A bamboo ceiling is keeping Chinese Americans out of corporate leadership positions. The cause of these underrepresentations are complex, but they include both cultural differences and implicit discrimination. Next slide, please. Infrastructure is fundamental to the functioning of every modern economy. Chinese Americans were among the first immigrants to play a primary role in building this critical infrastructure. One of their early contributions was building rail infrastructure in the late 1800s. The US transcontinental railway network connected an enormous but fragmented market and allowed internal migration to economic hotspots, notably during the California gold rush. In addition, the advent of rail travel in the US linked manufacturing and agricultural supply chains and enabled the emergence of heavy industries like iron and steel manufacturing. Next slides, please. Thanks in part to the influx of Chinese immigrants who came to the US to study in the post-World War II period and eventually became US citizens, the contribution of Chinese Americans became increasingly visible in academia and science. The integration of Chinese Americans into the US scientific community is evident in the growth in the number elected as member of professional societies, such as the National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Sciences. The leading scientists and innovators honored by these professional societies are representative of the numerous Chinese Americans working on basic and applied research critical to the technological innovations that drive America's global economic leadership. As of 2018, 15% of working Chinese Americans are employed in the occupation of life, physical and social sciences, computing and mathematics, and agriculture and engineering, nearly 3 times as high as the percentage of total Americans who work in these fields. While persistently underrepresented in leadership positions, some have managed to break the bamboo ceiling. Chinese Americans founded or serve as C-suite executive members in 20 companies in the Fortune 500 between 2011 and 2020. In total, these companies' market cap amounts to 1.38 trillion as of June 2020. That's equivalent to 10% of the NASDAQ market cap. Among the most prominent entrepreneurs include our member, Jerry Yang, co-founder of Yahoo, Steve Chang, co-founder of YouTube, and Eric Yuan, founder of Zoom, which has become an essential tool during the COVID pandemic. Next slides, please. Generations of Chinese Americans have contributed to a more open and tolerant society, from early immigrants fighting for the right to be legally accepted as Americans to younger generation focusing on wider civil rights battles in the form of social movements and even artistic works, affect not only themselves, but also other minority and disadvantaged groups. Under the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese immigrants were prohibited from becoming citizens and hence denied the right to vote, giving them no political power to contest unfair treatment. Instead, they turned to the legal system to fight discriminatory immigration and citizenship laws. Two cases stand out for their longer-term implication. The United States versus Wang Kim Ark established the concept of birthright citizenship in the US. Wang Kim Ark, a San Francisco-born Chinese American, was barred from entering the US upon returning from China in 1894 on the grounds that he was not a US citizen under the Chinese Exclusion Act. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Mr. Wang, stating that children born in the US to non-citizen parents are automatically granted citizenship under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Another case, Yik Wu versus Hopkins, resulted in a landmark Supreme Court ruling advocating for equal protection under the law for all US citizens, for all US residents, irrespective of race or nationality. Yik Wu was a laundry facility owned by Li Yik, a Chinese immigrant in California. Mr. Li sued for a right of habeas corpus after he was imprisoned for refusing to pay a fine for allegedly violating an ordinance that was discriminatory to Chinese-owned laundries. So in 1886, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Yik Wu, ruling that it was unconstitutional to discriminate against a group of people in the passage or enforcement of legislation. So the case was the first in a long series of cases to use the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and the decision opened the door for immigrant integration into the US society and established an important precedent for subsequent related cases. Next slides. As America's population has grown more diverse, its political leaders and public servants have, albeit slowly, come to more closely resemble the constituents they serve. Chinese Americans have been an integral part of this encouraging shift, playing an increasing role in both civil service and electoral politics. One of these political leaders was Harry Fong. He's a Republican from Hawaii and the first Chinese American in the US Congress. And some of the other tribalizers include our chair, Gary Locke, who served as the former US ambassador to China and as the 21st governor of Washington. Elaine Chao, she was appointed as Secretary of Labor and became the first Chinese American to serve in the president's cabinet. Not only did they make important public policy contribution, but they also serve as role models for future generations to enter civil service and politics. More recently, Chinese Americans have bolstered the nation's institutions by working within the civil service and public administration organizations, playing a growing role in electoral politics and making a sizable contribution to national defense and security, demonstrating a commitment to the core values of the US. Next slides, please. In addition to utilizing legal and social justice channels to effect change, Chinese Americans have used arts and culture to bring awareness to social political issues. Chinese Americans' contribution to fields ranging from photography to animated film has been profound. Notably, Chinese Americans are active in fashion and architecture. They also have been a long-standing voice in the arts in the US. Pioneers include An Li, best known for his movie Life of Pi, Brokeback Mountain, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Ali Wong, a comedian of both Vietnamese and Chinese descent. She achieved her mainstream popularity with two Netflix-produced stand-up comedy specials, Baby Cobra and Hard Knock Wife. Last year, we have also seen increasing AAPI representation in the entertainment industry, such as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Chloe Zhao winning an Oscar for Best Picture, Nomadland. Next slide, please. A major workforce for healthcare and medical research, Chinese Americans have also played a significant role in strengthening the US health system, including during the current pandemic. Some of the tribalizers, including our member, Dr. David Ho, a virologist, he helped to develop combination antiretroviral therapy, a drug cocktail that turned HIV from a death sentence into a manageable condition. Dr. Ho is now leading a research team developing COVID-19 treatments. Did you know who developed the N95 respirator? It's a Chinese American. He's a Chinese American, Peter Tsai, who is a material scientist. Needless to say, how his invention has kept healthcare workers safe during the pandemic. And in 2018, there were approximately 18,000 Chinese American biological scientists, medical scientists, and others life scientists working in the US, accounting for 7% of the workforce in these occupations. Next slides, please. Continuing and evolving barriers restrict Chinese American participation in US society, resulting in lost opportunities for the country as a whole. These barriers include a long-standing stereotyping of Chinese Americans as perpetual foreigners, consistent underrepresentation in leadership position in corporate sectors, and challenges such as limited English language skills and education levels among those struggling to advance economically. Escalated US-China tensions and scapegoating linked to the COVID-19 pandemic have raised the prospect of new and renewed challenges in the form of increased immigration restrictions and the risk of racial profiling in government security clampdowns. Failure to address these barriers would result in a missed opportunity for American society at large. Tackling these barriers would unleash untapped economic, political, and creative potential among Chinese Americans, which in turn would benefit the nation as a whole. Next slide. Today, the Chinese American community continues to hold enormous untapped economic, political, and creative potential. History has shown that, as has been the case with other minority groups, the more welcoming the US has been to Chinese Americans, the more it has benefited from their presence. Immediate action is needed to address the obstacles faced by Chinese Americans, some of which are unique to the community, many others of which are also faced by other minority communities. Meaningful progress will require efforts from multiple stakeholders, including government, political leaders, business leaders, civil society organizations, think tank academia, and the media. Only through productive dialogue and engagement on these issues can shared interests be identified, assumptions be challenged with data and evidence, and solutions be identified and implemented. This will pave the way for continued progress in the future to the benefit of all Americans. Next slides. Since our community has seen a rise in anti-Asian hate and violence with the escalated US-China tensions and scapegoat linked to the COVID pandemic, together with leaders from AJC, ADL, and AACP, Committee of 100, we issue a statement that we stand in solidarity with other minority groups and united in the same spirit and mission to denounce all acts of anti-Asian American racism and bigotry. I encourage all of you to watch the video on our YouTube channel, We Rise Together, Stop Anti-Asian Hate, a special virtual town hall. I know we're also coming up over a year, so we are reviewing our 10 points action plan with our partner organizations and hope to share an update soon. Next slides, please. So we have been giving this talk to over 150 groups. One of the most frequently asked questions from the audience is, how can I help? So a few examples that we shared. First of all, is to really educate the American public about our history and struggles. We need to tell our story better. And furthermore, want to demand that the US government respect and protect Chinese American scientists and academics from unfair racial profiling. So last October, we announced the research finding from our work with the University of Arizona, a joint research project designed to understand how research and academics have been affected by the limitation that the US government has placed on international exchange with China, with special focus on the impact on professors and researchers who are of Chinese descent. We received significant press coverage, including feature in Nature, Chronicle of Higher Education, Science, in Times of Higher Education. And this past also September, we unveiled research jointly led by Committee of 100 and our Next Generation Leaders alumni, Andrew Kim, which shed light on significant racial disparities in the implementation of Economic Espionage Act of 1996 and under the China Initiative. The data from the research is drawn from nearly 300 defendants across nearly 200 separate cases. I know the Department of Justice has announced a reconsideration of the China Initiative. While we acknowledge, that this is a right approach, but much more work needs to be done to ensure that all cases being prosecuted are based solely on evidence and not on perception. And then furthermore, break down the bamboo ceiling and advocate tangible policy toward greater representation of leadership roles for AAPI across all industries and fields. Committee of 100 has been hosting a series of Asian American career ceilings panel discussions. They can also be found on our YouTube channel, and I encourage you to take a look. And again, as we mentioned earlier about representation, encourage your community to vote and let their voice be heard. And finally, train the next generation of leaders who we believe are the movers and shakers of the future. And we have seen the younger generation are increasingly putting themselves out there, letting themselves to be heard. And perhaps we need a new and bold marketing strategy for the Chinese American community to Americans overall to use new media and leverage new tribalizers in media who are Chinese Americans to promote issues critical to the Chinese American community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. That was great. Right. I don't seem to, okay, start my video. Okay, great. I can see you. You can see me. Thank you for sharing with us. That's a great study, detailed study. So we're now opening up for, just questions. So anyone who have questions, feel free to put in the chat box or feel free to raise your hand. With that, I would also like to ask Mr. Tang, who is representing the Wayland Town Diversity Committee, to say a few words. This event is co-hosted by Wayland Chinese American Association, Wayland Town Diversity Committee, and Wayland Library. Thank you. Mr. Tan, you're muted. Can't hear you.
Hi, this is Yao Tan, representing the human rights groups within the town Wayland. First, I'd like to welcome all of you to attend this event. Also, thank you so much, Committee 100 presented such a eye-opening talk for us. Wayland is very care about the human rights and equity, diversity, and inclusions. And for everyone, the residents, visitors, business, and as well as the town employee. So we believe through the education, through the mutual understanding, we will help us to achieve that goal. Following that, we have a lot of events, collaborate with local community groups such as Wayland Chinese American Association, with the library, and we continue co-sponsor different events to have different type of people working together, try to learn from each other. And also, I'd like to announce a particularly exciting news for people from Asia. Our school committee just passed the motion to have the Lunar New Year's as a school holidays starting from now. So it really shows that the town is working toward mutual understanding, acceptance of various culture. Also, not only, it's also that people like from different race, even Caucasians, everyone have the real experience on different cultures. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks, Mr. Tan. Yeah, thank you. I see a couple of questions pop up. So Ray, I'm just going to read the questions and then you can take the lead to start the discussion.
Yeah. Yes, that's
Okay.
great. And
Okay.
also, I also wanted to invite my colleague, Charles Zenkowski. He's our Senior Director of Communications and Marketing, in case he can help answer any questions about our organization.
Great. Welcome, Charles. So the first question is, how does the Committee 100 engage with the younger generation of Chinese America?
That's a great question, and I think one of the things that we've been actively engaged with is the Next Generation Leaders Program. So we are really looking to hear what are on the minds of the younger generation and how they can help the how they can help the Chinese American community. So we actually, in this past May, relaunched the program, and so we welcome you to help spread the words for anyone who is interested in helping to help better serve our community to join our program. You will be invited to attend our annual conference and gala, but also to join a cohort of individuals who are passionate about giving back to the society, to come up with service project and meaningful ways to give back. And of course, I'll let Charles speak on the social media aspect as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think obviously we want to be, we're very active on social media, and we invite, questions and feedback, and obviously the sharing of our content. Today we just announced that, and it was posted across our social media, we're doing a brand new project with Columbia University. We're going to be launching an initiative where we're going to be looking at what are the challenges and the real life situation of Chinese Americans across society. And we're going to use social media as a tool to help not only share that survey, but also engage in questions and dialogue, a part of that too as well. So, we like to think of Committee 100 as yes, we're a 33-year-old organization, but we have some really unique and fresh views and perspectives on how to engage with the community. And we know that social media is one of those. So, as Ray had expertly said in the beginning of the talk, please hit us up on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Those are we're on all 5 of those channels. We are not on TikTok yet. So do not look for us on TikTok. We're not there yet from that standpoint as well, but maybe something to come from there as well.
That's really great to hear. And I just want to, I like to add something that as part of this AAPI Heritage Month, Wayland Chinese American Association and the Diversity Committee Library, we co-hosted several events. And prior to this week's event, we organized a young children painting 100 years of Chinese immigrants history and really focusing on the contribution prior to current state 1945. And last week we invited the editor-in-chief and 13 kids to share their journey as part of this creation of the book. And I think that's a very nice way to engage our young generation. And some of you probably participated that event. Just wanted to put out there. The book is available on Amazon. You can purchase, and I can share with this through the chat if anyone is interested. So,
No,
okay.
that's wonderful. I think that just to add another thread here, I think one of the things that Ray has done through this wonderful presentation that we did, and from a research perspective, is also to point out some of the challenges, right? I think if we would go back in time a year ago, Ray and I would agree that, might change the title of our particular presentation to the challenges as well of
Mhm.
Chinese Americans, because, if you go through that, if you printed up the entire report, I think, Ray, I think it's over 140 pages of data, right? I think that's what it is in terms of 7 different subsectors. So there's a lot of information in there. So it's important to notice that, there's only 1 in 30 architects is Chinese American. Only 1 in 20 fashion designers is Chinese American, right? There are still gaps in that need to be addressed. And the only way to address those is by talking about them. And I think the young artists, I think that's a fabulous program as a means of advocating and promoting, Asian American and Chinese American contributions from that standpoint as well, and continue to talk about that. Because if we don't continue to talk about this, it's not going to change. There's not going to be an opportunity for change from there as well. So it's wonderful to hear about that program.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the next question is, what more, I think right on the point of advocate ourselves, and what more can we do to raise the awareness of the Chinese American contribution to the fabric of the society and to the world? Um,
I think as we mentioned, really feeling fortunate to have been invited to give this talk. This is really the starting point, but it's definitely not the end point. And again, as we mentioned in our slide, encourage all of you to continue share the story, share the report. And if you know any communities who would benefit from these types of virtual talks, we will happy to also be in touch with them and see ways how we can better tell our story. And then the other thing I think for our From Foundations to Frontier, we're hoping that it can be converted into a curriculum and so that they can be taught in schools. And again, I think that's the best way is to educate our younger generation and start from the youngest to learn about our history. And Charles, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, expertly said. And I think it's, as was just said, obviously we're celebrating or we're putting a close on AAPI, Heritage Month. And I think what we want to try and do is make sure that it almost becomes a little bit of a thing of the past because we're celebrating it throughout the entire year, right? It's kind of like we know obviously focus, but what we don't want to do is now lose the focus of the contributions of Chinese Americans and Asian Americans because we've switched to a different month. There are states, as we talked about, Ray just said, from a curriculum perspective, there's 2 states in the nation that have, obviously declared and made law that AAPI will be part of public school curriculum, right? Illinois and New Jersey are the 2 states, but that leaves 48 more, right?
mhm,
So there's still work to be done because I know, and I've been very honest with Ray about this because we have wonderful conversations. As a white guy from Long Island, right? I was not taught AAPI history in the public school that I went to. And there's a significant gap in what I went through as well. And so I think that those types of conversations to have, those honest conversations to have, enables us to move forward as a society and say there's a significant gap in terms of what we are taught in schools and what actually has been part of our history. And we need to make sure that we're addressing that. And if we don't continue to speak up about that, it's not going to change. And the textbooks won't change. And the curriculum won't change from there as well. So we need to continue to be advocates and fans for that as well.
Totally agree. Thank you. The next question, I
Sure.
think there's a more of a comment and then a question. The successful lawsuit in the late 1800s, if I remember correctly, so I think, yes, you are remembering correctly, I think so. It seemed that to indicate considerable ability to really self-advocate for more fair engagement. And so the question is, are there similar legal successes in recent days, recent years?
I would say, I mean, Ray and I are not politicians by trade, right? So I think from, we get some of our lawyer, we actually have a counsel as well that could probably answer some of those questions as well. But I think the fact that if you just look at this current administration from there as well, there is a conscious effort, I think, to address issues related to AAPI in the current administration that maybe did not take place in the prior administration. The COVID Hate Crimes Act and the passage of that, I think, is a good sign of things to come. I think the understanding that AAPI hate is a real issue and addressing that and there's been congressional roundtables on those issues. So I think the fact that that issue isn't being swept under the rug and saying how we address this, I think we have great representation, in the likes of Judy Chu and other lawmakers who are out there pushing for AAPI recognition in society from that standpoint as well. Because as we know, I think as an organization and then also as a society and as a minority group, that typically there'll be times where discussions are had where we need to do more for the African American community, for the Latino community, and that's all absolutely accurate. But then typically the conversation stops and they don't mention the Native American community or the Asian American community or the Chinese American community within that as well. So there's still much work to be done to make sure that those communities are top of mind for issues that help shape us as a nation move forward. Ray, I don't know if I did that question justice. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but okay. Yeah, she gives me a thumbs up. We're good to go. So, yeah.
Great.
Okay.
The next question is around what are the biggest challenges and struggles facing Chinese Americans today, based on your study, and how we can, as a society or our individuals, to make the change of that.
Yeah, I think in the study, there's definitely the mention of the perpetual foreigners, how, we're viewed as perpetual foreigners and always choosing side, the dual loyalty. Where do you stand? Do you stand with the US or with China? And in terms in the career, also the study looked into bamboo ceiling representation, AAPI representation. It mainly, the difficulty is not on the entry level, but mainly from those who are at managerial, who's rising up to the executive leadership level. So again, that's some of the challenge. And of course, in the current time with the pandemic of the rising anti-Asian hate, and as Charles mentioned, what is our, the government doing actively, proactively to address some of these issues? Yeah, anything else you like to add, Charles?
No, yeah, I mean, even just that nuance, right, of just like safety, public safety for Chinese Americans, right, from that standpoint as well. There was just a wonderful story, an unfortunate story, but on CNBC, I think yesterday, the day before, that was written on how, as we as society start to move towards back to work environments, do Chinese American and Asian American women feel safe in those environments riding the subway systems of New York City? It was a accurate and fearful portrayal of what some Chinese American and Asian American women are feeling as society moves, and some fears that have. And again, from my perspective, as a white guy walking the subway, I don't have a fear of looking over my shoulder, right? I don't have a fear of being maybe pushed on the tracks, unfortunately, or something of that nature as well. There are issues that we need to talk about from that standpoint as well. And why does that why does white privilege exist, and how do we address and break that down? I think that's a real honest conversation, and we as an organization, the Committee of 100, are not afraid of having that conversation, and that's a good thing to have.
Thank you. That's great. So I think we seem to have finished the questions from the chat box, and then just anything anyone wanted to raise the question. Ray and Charles, you wanted to add, continue to add anything?
No, the only thing the only thing is, first off, obviously, we appreciate the opportunity so much from that standpoint as well. Please continue to engage with us. One of the things we want to try and do, we make sure Ray and I do, is this is not a one and done. We'd like to do other programs with this group, with your organizations as well, moving forward. Follow us on social media. You'll get the latest from our announcements as well. You've probably seen over the past year or two that Committee 100 has been very proactive in terms of our statements. Not only our statements and calls to action related to the AIPI community, but also for other communities. When for the African American community, for the Latino community, we've been speaking out for issues, anti-Semitism, for the Jewish American community as well. There's key issues. The president of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, had said something to us a year ago when we did that town hall that Ray mentioned in her speech: be a friend before you need a friend. And it's kind of a mantra that we've lived here internally when he said that, because we believe in that. And we believe that, don't just wait until you need something, be out there and be an advocate and be a fan and be a believer in a group, and try and help and see how you can support them. So, we'd love the support. We love the advocacy, and we'd love to see our Twitter numbers raised from that standpoint as well. So we appreciate it very much from there.
It's great. Yeah. Good, great. I see that in the chat box. And then also, if you have any other questions, or if you like to reach out to the committee for any future engagement, feel free to send an email to Ray. It's listed here. Just maybe, anything, Mr. Town, you'd like to add?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like to say that one thing I say we can do actually, I find it's very effective is engage with the town government. And I'm glad I joined the human rights group. The first time I served for the town, I found it's an easy way to get your message out, help the town to understand each other between the different interest groups. So I'm glad that Wayland is engaging that. We already start engage people to join the different committees, to join the different groups. And they need the people, they need our expertise, and we can contribute. So let's do it, join the community. And also, I'm so appreciate that the Wayland Library, they are so aware of the Chinese population. We grow from almost a handful of people when we moved here 50 years ago to now there's 20% of school students are Asians, and the public like 12 to 14% of population are the Chinese Asians. So the library noticed that they are collecting our input. They want to document the immigration of the Chinese population to Wayland, and they make that become a document history for the future Waylanders to look at. You may look at, trace back your ancestors, you will find their stories. It's actually documented in the Wayland Library collections. So it's a lot of things we can do, and be engaged is most important.
Yeah, and be our own voice. And then library organized a event towards the end of March. I remember that really we had a very engaging dialogue on some of us sharing the story of our own, and engage with the librarian who's interested in document and archive some of the activities and the history of our own. So we're basically writing our own history in our town. So I'm sure many other towns are doing the same. So really appreciate your effort to share with us and come and join us. Thank you so much, Ray and Charles, and everybody on your, in the background, whoever is helping with all the studies.
I want to tell another story. Is I have one of the school, I'm one of the committee chair actually approaching us, they encourage us, provide the opportunity, tell us the opportunity for serving the town. And so we start have few people started applying for the committee members. So those, I really appreciate that kind of help from the existing committee members. They reach out to us, not only we join them, they help us to lead our way to serve the government. And that is really helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity again. We really appreciate it very much. It was our honor.
Thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you. Yep.
Have a great afternoon.